Hello, welcome to CashcroftTV. My name is Kaylin Ashcroft. Thanks for watching another video on our leaders. Today we will be covering the president of Iraq, Barham Salih. Here's the Kurdish spelling, Barham Salih, and Katerina Sakellaropoulou, of the president of Greece. And here's the Greek spelling, Katerina Sakellaropoulou as well. So yeah. Also, this is the 1 year anniversary from my first upload. So at the very end of the video, if you'll be willing to bear it, I'll be doing a little bit of reflection there as well. So without further ado, we'll begin with Barham Salih. So Barham Salih is the 8th president and current president of Iraq. He's former prime minister of Kurdistan and of the Kurdistan region, and former deputy prime minister of the Iraqi federal government. He was elected and assumed president's office on October 2nd, 2018, so relatively recently. And yeah, I guess I'll go into a little bit of more detail into the actual structure of the Iraqi government, but it's sort of a de facto rule as of the recent history that the president of Iraq should be a Kurd. So I'll explain that in more detail, and I'll try to elaborate on the conflict for those who have not specifically been following it or are maybe perhaps a little bit confused with the sort of many moving parts in the region. So in terms of his early life, which would be a good place to start, he was born on July 2nd of 1960 in Sulaymania, which is a Kurdish region. A notable event in his younger life was that in 1979, when he was 19 years old, he was arrested by the Baathists. Here's the Baathist flag. Saddam Hussein was at one point the leader of the Baathist party as well, the Baathist regime. And he was actually arrested twice on charges of involvement in Kurdish national movement, which he was. But his role was generally considered non-violent. He was mostly just taking pictures of protesters in the Salamania city. He was imprisoned for 43 days in detention in a special investigation commission prison, and supposedly he had to go through torture as well in Kirkuk. So very unfortunate, and obviously not to jump in too far, but for an individual at 19 years old in a prison as a Kurd being tortured, I doubt he had any expectation of becoming president of Iraq. So that's just a little bit of early reflection here. So after his release finished, after he got out of prison, he wanted to sort of he completed his last little bit of high school, and then he wanted to flee the persecution. So he fled to the United Kingdom, where he studied. He got a bachelor's in engineering and construction from the University of Cardiff in 1983 when he was 23 years old. And ultimately, he also got a doctorate, a PhD in engineering in statistics and computer applications from the University of Liverpool in 1987 at 27 years old. So obviously, he definitely has at least a technical background, or he's fascinated in numbers and quite quantitatively oriented. And this, I did think, definitely his impressive academic background definitely helped his rise in terms of power. Also during this time, he married Serba Salih, who was also a doctor in botany. She's also a women's rights activist, and she was also born in Kurdistan region as well. And she's the founder of the Kurdish Botanical Foundation. So during his studies while he was in the United Kingdom, or actually prior to leaving the United Kingdom, he actually, at 16 years old, became a member of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the PUK. And when he went to London, he was actually, as he was continuing his studies, he maintained his relations with this party, and he actually was put in charge of the PUK relations in London. So I think it was what led to his rise in the party so quickly was his impressive academic background, and and I think he was also very, very personable, and I think he had his imprisonment probably gave the party something that they could at least maybe not empathize with, but at least sympathize with. So I think that definitely helped him in attaining this role at a pretty young age before he even completely finished his studies. Eventually, after completing his studies, he was elected a member of the PUK leadership at its first party conference. So this is after the first Gulf War, when Iraqi Kurdistan was liberated from the Ba'ath Party. This was his task was of heading the PUK office in the United States. So he was sent to the United States, probably because firstly he had already been headed the office in London, so his English speaking capabilities were quite impressive. So he was sent off to the United States, which also, I think at this point too, it's also was giving him a global perspective of what perhaps governments are like in less turmoil regions as well. So yes, he's fluent in Kurdish because he's Kurdish descent, and Arabic and English. So kind of some background about the liberation of the Iraqi Kurdistan. In 1991, Saddam Hussein was Secretary of General of the Ba'ath Party, and the end of his term as the party went down at that point too, and so did his term as Prime Minister of Iraq as well. So with the fall of Saddam Hussein, essentially the Iraqi Kurdistan peoples were liberated, and the PUK party, amongst the other parties, also were able to thrive. So after the fall of the Ba'ath regime, he became Deputy Prime Minister of the interim Iraqi government in the middle of 2004, and he also was Minister of Planning in the transitional government of 2005. Then he became Deputy Prime Minister in the Iraqi elected government, the first Iraqi elected government, in 2006 after the Ba'ath Party had been overthrown under Nouri al-Maliki, in Nouri al-Maliki's cabinet. And as he also served during this point as head of the Economic Committee. So although his actual educational background was not in economics, I think his just impressive academic background and his worldliness garnered him the capacity to be a economic official within the party. So during this time, he also launched it's called the International Compact, which is the International Compact must build a prosperous, democratic, federal country in peace with itself and with the region of the world. Essentially, the objective of this International Compact is to engage with the international community to help the situation of Iraq and all the subsets of the Iraqi people, including the Kurds, Sunni and Shia. He, in the 2009, the Colbert Report, this is before he had become president, he praised the U.S. intervention into Iraq and the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. And however, during this report, he also stated that many Kurds still wanted independence, which is very true, as we'll see occurred in both quite recent referendums, and even till this day, many, if not the majority of Kurds still want their independence. So he became Prime Minister of Kurdistan under the PUK party. Essentially, the Kurdistan region is a somewhat autonomous region of Iraq because it's predominantly filled with Kurds. However, it is still considered part of Iraq and in effect under the control of the Iraqi government as a whole. I would have drawn a parallel to something as we see in Israel, but the relations are considered to be a little bit better than that between Palestine in Israel, and also Palestine is by many international organizations considered to be its own country, although the United States does not consider it to be so, whereas Kurdistan is considered to be part of Iraq generally by most of the international community. So I cancel that connection. However, it's an interesting point of comparison. So in 2009, he spearheaded the Kurdistani List, which was during the legislative elections, which was a coalition which led to the coalition list of people winning 59 out of 111 seats. So a small majority. However, it garnered him the prime minister of the Kurdistan region. This period was also, although pretty much all of the history around this time was quite tumultuous, but this particular period was marked with the Goran change movement, which was also a party, causing much civil unrest, as well as there were a lot of scrambling after losing the strong-held city of Sulaymaniyah, which is actually the city that Salih was born in. So obviously it was a difficult time to be prime minister, but they still found him fit for the role. Maybe not even that they found him fit for the role, it's that he was a good negotiator and good at uniting people by forming the list and forming the coalition that ultimately led to his power, which might actually be his greatest skill. In 2011, there were Kurdish protests in Iraq, and there was a vote of no confidence for Salih. However, he managed to get through this period and maintain his position as Prime Minister of Kurdistan. During this time as Prime Minister of the Kurdistan region as well, he also signed the first major oil contract with ExxonMobil, which he signed after drafting and amending new oil laws. So once again, emphasizing that although his background might have been in engineering or a more technical background, he was also, I guess many would also consider business to be a technical field as well, but it's kind of a mix between law and engineering. But either way, he's quite good at formulating these business contracts, and he formulated the first oil contract with ExxonMobil during his governancy. In 2012, he relinquished the post to Nihirvan Idris Barzani, who was actually who was his past political opponent. He had beaten him. However, he relinquished this post to him in order to form the KDP, which was Barzani's party, PUK alliance. But also, I think it wasn't mentioned, but I think he was perhaps preparing himself for ultimately attaining presidency. But during this time, and to some people's criticism, he started a new party called the Coalition for Democracy and Justice, and this was aimed at subsuming the smaller vocal parties such as the Goran or the Change movement and the Kemal group as well, to challenge the KDP-PUK alliance. And he formed this in 2017. So he got some criticism for this because he had left the PUK party and let Barzani become Prime Minister of Kurdistan, started his own party against it, which obviously was seen as, by many actually, an ethical thing, because the objective of this new party was to eradicate some of the corruption. However, when he ran for president of Iraq the next year in 2018, he realigned himself with the PUK party. So many people considered this kind of a two-faced. So as I said, in October 2nd of 2018, he won with 219 votes against the opposition Fuad Hussein, who only had 22 votes. So he won by a large majority. In 2019, to mark his very early into his first presidency, he condemned the 2019 Turkish offensive into northern Syria. So this is probably one of the most important news stories of the last, I guess we could consider it 5 years. So the Turkish army was aligned with the Syrian National Army, and it was opposed to the Syrian Arab forces, as well as the Syrian Democratic Forces. So the Syrian Democratic Forces were predominantly Kurds, Bashar al-Assad, who is the president of Syria, led the Syrian Arab forces. So essentially, I think one of the reasons he condemned it, and here we come to the second quote here: the Turkish offensive will cause untold humanitarian suffering, empower terrorist groups. The world must unite to avert a catastrophe, promote political resolution to the rights of all Syrians, including Kurds, to peace, dignity, and security. So a couple things going on here. Firstly, the U.S. had stopped support for the al-Assad regime. They had primarily just been supporting the Kurds anyways, and the Kurds are actually aligned with al-Assad. However, on October 6th, they removed their presence from Syria. And then on October 9th, the Turkish army invaded into Syria to overthrow, in attempts to overthrow al-Assad. So I think a couple things. I think firstly, Salih wanted to, at this time, His Excellency was his title. He wanted to perhaps, even though United States had been decreasing its support and now they have no relations with the Syrian government, he perhaps wanted to align himself still with that. But also I think he wanted to protect the Kurds in Syria at the time, which I think is being Kurdish himself and supporting the Kurdistan region. I think he did not support the Turkish army entering. Similarly, Turkey is supported by, Russia is pro-Assad. Perhaps maybe he wanted to align himself with perhaps Russia as an ally, and with respect to this issue, Russia was also against the Turkish offensive in northeastern Syria. So that's probably the, yeah. So in October of 2019, later that year, there was what's called the October Protests, which debatably are still going on. These protests are firstly against the Iranian intervention in the Iraqi government, and as well as the corruption within the Iraqi government, as well as the unemployment in the Iraq. And the objective of the October protests that still go on to today is ultimately to even overthrow the whole government. So this had marked a further tumultuous period for his newly appointed presidency. So at this point, Adil Abdul Mahdi resigned due to these protests, and Barham, or Salih, refused to appoint a new governor, who was former governor of Basra, Asad al-Adani, and he said he would resign. He unfortunately, because he was he's president, which is technically the head of state, he did not have the right to void this appointment of Asad al-Adani. So he said, I will rather resign than appoint Governor Asad al-Adani. So because he believed that the supporters or the demonstrators would not support this individual. Ultimately, a different individual, Mohammed Tawfiq al-Lawi, became the prime minister of the Iraqi region. But ultimately, he has claimed he will step down. So perhaps even maybe by the time you're watching this video, he may not be in power anymore by then, or perhaps something might happen and he might stay in power. So that's this is all very recent news. So kind of a little bit more background on the country for some of the parts that might have been a little bit difficult to grasp, because there are many moving parts, not only in Iraq, but within the whole region. So Iraq is a country that is predominantly Shia. About 60% of the population in Iraq is Shia. And they account for mostly in the south and the eastern region. Also, Iran has a large Shia population as well. About 37% are Sunni, which are in the north and the west. And but within that, the Kurds are 85% Sunni. So even with the Kurds are also 15% Shia. So not only are Kurds a minority in terms of their just their heritage of being Kurdish, Also, for the most part, 85% belong to the minority portion of the religion. So, yeah, I think the most difficult would actually to be, or perhaps the Kurds who are Shia, maybe switch to Shia to align with the Shia majority, or perhaps they might even have it most difficult because they cannot be accepted by their other Kurds, or the actual Iraqi Shia. So obviously a lot of ethnical and religious differences within the country. But after the 2003 overthrow of Saddam Hussein, there's a new de facto deal. In the first elections of 2005, it has been decided by de facto, it's not put in law, that the Speaker of the House in the Parliament must be Sunni, the Prime Minister should be Shia, and the President should be Kurdish. So I think, well, this is a known fact that this division was decided to sort of balance the playing field. Where Kurds are a minority, the president gets to be Kurdish, although their powers may be somewhat more limited. Whereas the prime minister, which is a somewhat, I guess, lower role, however more subjected to democratic forces to some extent, one might argue, is Shia, which is from the majority. However, obviously the Kurdistan prime minister would be Kurdish as well. And the speaker would be Sunni, also from the minority portion of the population. 37% are Sunni. So, and this has basically been to, Salih's objective he was elected because he was more of a moderate Kurdish leader. Some of the other opposition leaders wanted to sort of see the country broken up, see more referendums, whereas Salih is considered more moderate and hopefully, or I believe, aims at keeping the country united. I don't want to speak too much about this because my opinions had changed, but formerly I had been vehemently believed that the Kurdish region should separate from Iraq. I believe that they were not getting treated as well as they could, but with the new de facto rules where the president, as we see now, is a Kurd, I believe that the Kurdish people will get better treatment under the Iraqi government. So, and that's why Salih was largely selected. There were actually, so as mentioned, there were two actual under the Kurdistan regional government. There was a 2005 referendum amongst Kurds, and 98% of voters voted in favor of leaving Iraq. So that is a huge majority. But however, it was a non-binding vote, and they were forced to stay a part of Iraq. Similarly, in 2017, a little bit later, by a small decrease, 93.25% voted in favor of leaving Iraq, and this led to a military conflict led by Mossad Barzani, who was prime minister at the time, who was actually the position was given to him by Salih as he stepped down to form the KDP-PUK alliance. And however, through this uprising, the Kurdish people lost 40% of their territory and their main revenue source, the Kirkuk oil fields. So, and Massoud resigned after this. So the Kurds had fought very, very hard for their freedom, and after this tumultuous period, they elected, Salih was chosen to be president by 219 votes, where the next competitor only won 22 votes. Fawd Hussein won 22 votes, and he actually was more divisive figure in wishing to see a division of Iraq. So that's, I suppose, if anything, that's what Salih stands for, and he's a very public figure. You can see him, he's done international speeches. He's an individual who's internationally educated. He was educated in the United Kingdom. He spent time working in the United States, and he is a very a figure who wants to actually see at least cooperation between the many different moving parts in Iraq. And for that reason, I think he's good. And I don't think he's trying to cheat out the Kurdish people. I think he's just trying to get them the best opportunity he can while trying to avoid bloodshed. So to finish with the last quote here, Saddam Hussein has left us a wasteland. This country could have been the economic powerhouse of the Middle East. So this firstly echoes just how difficult the situation is in the region, but also when he refers to country, he says not the Kurdish people, not the Sunni people, not the Shia people. He believes it all one country that should be united and could rise up from the poverty that the country does face. So to go through the flags, and then we'll move into Katerina, and then we'll go into a brief comparison. So here's the flag of Iraq. Here is the symbol of the government of the Iraq. This is a symbol of the flag of the Ba'ath Party, which was most famous for its leader at the time, Prime Minister Saddam Hussein. It's a symbol of the PUK party, the Kurdish party that Salih for most of his career has aligned himself with until he tried starting his own party, but I believe he at this point is aligned once again with the PUK party. And lastly, this is the flag of the Kurdistan region and representative of the Kurdish people, which Salih is the representative of. In terms of population, it's got a population of 38.3 million people, so I guess we can call it middle-sized. However, its GDP is a little bit low for its population at 197.7 billion. Its area is 437,072 kilometers, so also pretty big. So pretty big region, pretty big population, about mid-size in both those respects, but it really has, at this point, hits below its weight in terms of GDP, and that's, I think, something that he mentions. He wants to see the country be an economic powerhouse. I think the economy is one of his top priorities. Obviously, decreasing violence comes first, and that's why he's trying to form deals with ExxonMobil, despite the Kurdish people having lost that region. So, yeah, all in all, I think he's a very good individual, but he's time can only go on, and I think both, at least the Kurds, I think most Kurdish people would at least admire what he's doing. Most of them do wish to be separated from Iraq. However, at least he's got their intentions at heart, and he's hoping for a better country as a whole. And I think for those in perhaps the Iraqi majority, Shia, or the Sunni majority in Iraq, they also, I think, hence the reason why he was selected, believe that he is one of the individuals who will keep the country united. So, without further ado, we'll go into Katerina Sakellaropoulou. Very difficult name for me to pronounce. It's very long, but I can read Greek characters, but some names are very difficult. So Katerina Sakellaropoulou was born on May 30th, 1956. For anyone who cares, my father was also born in May of 1956. So just wherever you can see parallels between you and these people helps, I think, firstly facilitate memory, but also when you connect yourself with these individuals, maybe it's something small, maybe it's a similarity in your initials or something like that. It just, I think it makes them a part of you and creates a connection between them and you. With my respect to Salih, he was born in July, so he's also a summer baby like me, which is, these are very small things, but these things I do think help facilitate memory and also just make the whole process of learning and connecting to this people more meritorious. So she's the president of Greece. She was selected by his predecessor was Prokopios Pavlopoulos. So she's the head of state in the Hellenic Parliament, or as it's called in Greek, the Vouli ton Ellinon, which is essentially the Parliament of Greece. And she attained this position in January of 2020. So very, very recently as well. So I think unlike Salih, who actually stepped down, however, he might come back into power, both of these individuals I think we'll be seeing much, much more of. And perhaps this video might be seen as some kind of an old artifact very, very soon. But I think it's interesting to note how these people are at this point, and this is history as we know it right now. She's the first female president of Greece, which is quite an amazing thing, but also somewhat surprising considering how long Greece history is, particularly even, obviously it was different, it was not Greece at the time, but in Plutarch's Lives, which is considered the Great Tomb, one of the greatest biography collections of all time, not a single one of them is female. So very impressive from that regards. Or perhaps not, although it's positive for her and it's positive the direction we're moving, negative in terms of a reflection of history. She was previously president of the Council of State, which is the highest supreme administration court in Greece, which is obviously a very good and impressive thing. However, one small critique is that, in my opinion, based on the separation of powers, I don't think it should be promoted where people move from the judicial branch into the executive or legislative branch, because such movements can cause a conflict of interest. So, for example, let's say you are a judge, even the head judge, if you have intentions to move to the legislative or executive branch, you might make unethical or unfair decisions. So I think they should be largely kept separate. And it's another question that obviously it's up to debate. For example, should you be able to prevent judges from becoming executive or legislative officials? I think that's also equally as unethical. So perhaps the two sides of the coin, I don't know exactly where I stand at this point, but I don't think it should be promoted or very common for people to move from the judicial branch to the executive or legislative branch. Otherwise, they might, if this is a known thing to do, people might go into the judicial branch and then just make decisions to please certain political parties and then jump over when they're sufficiently liked. So I think generally it's not a great thing, but I think in this case, I don't think she has been, did anything unethical to win the position. And in fact, I think it was actually the merit that she attained or achieved or presented in her time in the judicial branch that made her worthy to move into to president of Greece. So with respect to her early life, she was born in Thessaloniki, which is the second biggest city in Greece. It's about 1 million people, so not big with respect to the whole world, but pretty big for Greece, because Greece only has a population of 10.7 million people, so a little less than 10% of the population live in this city. It's also the capital of the Macedon region. So I guess for anyone who loves Greek, ancient Greek history, that's where Alexander the Great was from. So maybe somewhere in her bloodline she might have some of Alexander the Great's blood, which is I would consider some pretty good blood. She studied law at the National University of Capodistan, National and Capodistan University of Athens, my apologies, generally just called the University of Athens, which is the largest and oldest university in Greece at about 125,000. It's considered definitely top 3, maybe most likely number 2. Number 3 would probably be the National Technical University. However, that would be more for students going into technical fields, and she studied law. Some consider the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki to be the best university in Greece. Perhaps maybe it's not the best for law and she wanted to go to Athens, or maybe she just wanted to leave her home city and go to the actual capital of the country, which is Athens. So there are a variety of reasons. Also, the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki has about 40,000 students, so it's less than half the size, almost. It's about a third the size of Athens University. But nonetheless, for her postgraduate studies, she went to Paris II, which is a public law school. It's considered the top law school in all of France. When I say Paris 2, for those not familiar with the French system, it's not like number 1 is the best, number 2 is the second best, or number 3 is the third best. It's actually divided by field. So Paris 2 is actually includes the faculty of law. So generally considered, I think Paris 2 is the best law school in the country. So obviously had a great academic background and also worldliness, as we could see as a parallel of Salih, who had also studied in the United Kingdom. She had studied in France, so obviously she's familiar with other nations. Around the time she was 25 to 28 years old, after she had finished her studies in the mid-1980s, she was admitted to the Council of State, so very early. So for many people who do go to law school, one of the top positions to get is to become on the Supreme Court, and that's what she did. So obviously one of the top legal students in her country. And she pretty much stayed with the council ultimately up until the time she becomes president. So in 2000, she was admitted to the council, the year of 2000. When she was 44 years old, she became a counselor in the Supreme Court. So she stayed there for quite a long time, and obviously I think she enjoyed her work. She produced many important academic pieces in academic journals, mostly related to law, however also on other fields as well, as I'll get to. In 2015, she became vice president of the council, and in 2018, she became the first female president of the court by unanimous vote. So obviously she's very, very well liked and well respected within this branch of the government. And under the Syriza government, she supported particularly her progressive stance towards the environmental and human rights. So she's quite a progressive figure in the judicial branch. So if she was a conservative figure, well, I think by definition the fact that I think the work that she has done in the judicial branch is obviously not corrupt. If it had been corrupt, I think it would have been unethical for her to have moved into a presidential role. But the fact that she stayed in the judicial branch for so long and produced so many great works, I think it's safe and acceptable, and I think she's worthy to have become president of Greece. She's also a member of the Association of Judiciary Functionaries of the Council of State. She became Secretary General at one point and Vice President, and ultimately President in 1993. So she climbed the ranks through the judicial branch really quite quickly. And I think it's both because of her worldliness, but also just because I think she's quite an academic star. She regularly produces academic publications, and she's most famous piece of writing was her contribution to the book in 2017 called Financial Crises and Environmental Protection and the Case Law of the Council of State. So a piece of writing on financial crises, which are obviously a very important thing to be well familiar with in Greece, because Greece is definitely within the United European Union laggard in terms of economic prosperity. They're under the Eurozone, so they do use the euro, which is obviously difficult because, for example, €1 in, I don't know, we'll call it, Berlin might get you one currywurst. However, €1 in Greece is a lot more expensive. However, they're under the same currency zone, so they just have to work harder essentially to earn that one euro. So it's obviously difficult being under the same currency zone. Am I advocating for giving Greece its own currency? It's hard. It's very, very hard to say, but I think it's good to have firstly someone in the judicial branch, but now the president of Greece who is familiar with these financial matters, at least in terms of economic crises. But also her writings on environmental protection is also particularly important at this time as well. So in January 15 of 2020, the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis nominated her for the post of the Hellenic Republic, and 261 MPs out of 300 voted in her favor, so the vast majority. The small portion that didn't was probably for political reasons rather than personal reasons. She has a husband, Pavlos Katsonos, who's also a lawyer, and she has a child from a previous marriage as well. So, to move into the quotes, and then I'll talk about. I think from her, I think we'll be seeing a lot more a good relationship with the European Union, because she has a global outlook. But also she's a very big advocate for human rights, and that's one of the main issues with respect to the European Union right now, especially considering the still ongoing migrant crisis. As it works right now, essentially for a while, the European Union had been paying Turkey to hold off migrants, but essentially the migrants go through Turkey and often straight into Greece, where they are sort of distributed throughout the continent. So it's a very, very important country, and it's good to have an individual who's familiar with human rights and partial to human rights, especially not only as president of Greece, but also to be a member of the European Union. So here are the quotes. Here's obviously the flag of Greece. I hope you're familiar with it. This is the symbol of the University of Athens. This is the symbol of the University of Paris 2. This is the seal of Greece, and this is the symbol of the Parliament of Greece as well. As for the quotes, I think it's time the country had a distinguished woman in the highest state role. Let's not try to ignore it. Greek society still discriminates against women. This is going to change starting from the top. Mitsotakis. So that was the Prime Minister of Greece, sort of saying one of the reasons why it's important to elect a female to the highest role. I'd say she's the first to break the glass ceiling in the Greek system, and she's going to become a role model for many young Greek women. That's a famous professor, Aris Hatsis. And then a quote from herself: "I will aim for the broadest possible consensus while serving in the role, having been backed by all major parties." So as I mentioned, she won 261 MPs out of 300 voted for her. So across party lines, they voted for her. So her objective to achieve consensus amongst people from all parties is important, and also I think a parallel we can see with Salih, as I'll mention very soon in the comparison. Last things, population 10.7 million, so about a third of the population of Iraq. However, the GDP is about the same at 200.3 billion. So obviously on a per capita basis, they're much better off, but relative to other countries in the European Union, namely Germany, and formerly prior to Brexit, the United Kingdom, they're not faring too well, even with respect to France as well. The area is 131,957 kilometers squared, which is also about a third of that of Iraq. So considering their population is about a third and their area is about a third, you would expect its GDP to be about a third, but it's about the same. So it's an issue that plagues both nations that I will elaborate on right here in the comparison. So firstly, I think that both heads of state, I think the most important thing to note actually is that they're both heads of state, yet their positions are a little bit more ceremonial than they are applicable. For example, Adil Abdul Mahdi, or now Mohammed Tawfiq Alawi, are the prime ministers of Iraq, at least in the majority portion, and the role of being president as a Kurd is more ceremonial to bridge the gap between Kurdistan and the rest of Iraq. Same thing with being the president in Greece. It's an appointed role, and it's largely ceremonial as well, where they have veto rights and they essentially sign off on laws, whereas Mitsotakis is the prime minister, and one might debate that he might have more power. So both of these individuals actually have, although heads of state, they do not have the same relative powers that a head of state, as a president, for example, in the United States or in Russia, might have. So I think that would be the first point of comparison here. Secondly, they're also, with respect to their nations, they also both have quite an uphill battle they must fight. Both of the countries have had pretty difficult recent histories, and both of them as heads of state have a really difficult job they must fill. And they also attained both their positions really quite recently. So I think these will be two very, very important leaders to watch in the near history and perhaps even long history. And it would be nice to see both of their GDP figures growing, as well as the living standards, and also their the two nations' respective ratings with respect to human rights. They were, I think both of them were chosen based, or originally facilitated their climb through the political ranks through their academic backgrounds. Salih was a little bit more of a quant. He was comes from an engineering background, whereas Katerina has a bit more of a legal background. However, they both had pretty impressive degrees and international experience, which really helped them both rise in their respective political ladders. And they both also showed, with respect to the exception where Salih had left the PUK party, they both, for the most part, stayed with their party throughout their whole career, or in the respect to Katerina, stayed with the judicial branch pretty much their whole career. So I think another thing that marked their success was their commitment. If Salih had jumped parties more often or had left politics, perhaps lost his momentum, he would not be president. Same thing with Katerina. If she had left the council or the judicial branch, perhaps she would have lost her momentum and would not have been where she was. And I think they're both, lastly, inspiring figures because both of them come from what one consider to be a minority. Salih is a Kurd, and he's the head of Iraq, which is quite impressive, especially considering the past history and the hardships that the Kurdish people have faced. Similarly, Katerina is a woman, which is obviously a very difficult thing, being the first one in Greece. So both of them are considered, you can consider them to be outsiders, and I think for those reasons they both are inspiring figures. So yeah, that is the life of Salih and Katerina, the respective presidents of Iraq and Greece. I was going to reflect briefly on this, just being this is April 1st, the 1-year anniversary from my first upload. It's not the 1-year anniversary from the first video. I actually filmed 10 videos and then uploaded all 10 on day 1. So just a couple reflections on that. I chose April 1 because I was, to be honest, quite scared to do it. I thought, what if these videos are incredibly embarrassing? And I thought, what about 10 years down the line, I'll be laughing at this. And that's why I did April Fools, and with a little bit of humor, so I could kind of, do it more lighthearted. If I had done it April 2nd, then I couldn't always fall back on that. So I thought that was just a good thing. And also, why did I do 10 at once? I think if, for example, if you were to take 5 minutes or even less, like a 2-minute dialogue from any of these, I think anyone listens to anyone for less than 5 minutes, they could presume them to be low quality or bad. But the more data points one collects, the more one can see greatness. I think anyone perhaps that you might admire, if you listen to, or if you show, for example, a picture of something or a short video to someone for a couple minutes, they're going to be like, oh, that guy's an idiot. But if you listen to anyone for an hour, usually by that point you pick up some more data points. So I wanted to release 10 videos at the same point to accumulate many different data points at once. Also because each individual video is far from perfect, but the amalgamation of them, in my eyes, each video, I have a problem with. I said the wrong word sometimes, said the wrong date, sometimes I make a mistake on the PowerPoint, but in aggregate, everything together makes them perfect. That's also why I reference this graph many times in my past videos and throughout my life, but I think it's probably one of the most important graphs that I've seen of all time. So I don't have it here, but it's essentially just a XY axis, and it's a correlation between composers and their greatness, where at the top is Beethoven, but not only is the important thing to note is the volume axis. It's not that he's just the greatest, it's that he also produced the most symphonies or the most compositions. So all greatness is also just a function of quantity. I challenge anyone. A friend of mine said he wanted to be a musician, so I said, make 100 songs, and they're like, oh, like with 100 songs that you can't guarantee they'll be good. But firstly, you make 100 songs, you'll one of them is going to be probably good, or at least as you find different parts from them, 100. But also as you make 100, you get better and better. And I think throughout my videos, I think I've gotten better as I've done them. And I think in aggregate, I'm proud of everything that has been uploaded thus far in the 1-year period. So thank you for watching this video. And I hope you learned something about perhaps these two individuals, perhaps something about me, or perhaps their two respective countries. And I hope you continue to support. Thanks so much.